Okay, guys, let's get started. So first thing we want to do is build a Svelte project. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Svelte docs and I'm going to use the recommended way to start the project. So npx sv create and the name of the project. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to open up my terminal. You go to wherever you want to put this project and then we run the following npx sv create and let's call it forms. I'm gonna call it forms. Yeah. And this will load. So I'm gonna select library. We have a few options to configure. All I want is Tailwind. All we want to select is Tailwind for this project. Then I'll select typography and forms, and I'm going to use npm for that as well. So this will start building, creating a Svelte project for us. Takes a couple of seconds. You can use any package manager, by the way, and you can add more than that, but just make sure you have Tailwind CSS as well. That's the important one. Everything else doesn't matter. Okay, cool. Now that that's made, we can cd into that. And then I'm just going to do code dot, which opens up Visual Studio Code for me. So I'm going to open that up. And then I'm going to go here and we can open up the terminal in here. So what we're going to use for the validation of the forms is we're going to use Zod. So we need to install a few more things. So let's install npm izod before we get started. Okay, that's installing. Okay, perfect. That's ready to go. And we can do npm run dev. I'll start our little project. And we should have something here on our local host now. Yeah, perfect. Cool. So we have the basic project started and we have Zod installed, so we're ready to kind of start building. So what I've done so that you don't have to waste time building the actual template is I'll leave a link down below where you can actually follow along and just add the pure client-side validation code rather than adding this markup. So what I'm going to do is you'll go to that link, go to the gist, then you can just copy and paste everything and dump it into your page. If we take a quick look at this code, what it is it's basically the Zod schema and then some markup. So if you go back to your page, you should look like this. Should look something like this now. So what that means is copied it over and we have our Zod schema ready to go. Now we need to build our UI components. Let's go ahead and start building them. If you think about what we're trying to build, we're trying to build something that holds the form, all the data, and then we want something maybe that holds the individual elements. So we want something that holds all this stuff, and we want something that holds this. So let's go ahead and start building. So we'll create in our lib folder. So there should be two folders inside of your source. There should be routes and lib. We'll go to lib, create a new folder, call it forms, or you can call it anything really, but forms probably makes sense. We'll create a form that's felt file, and then what we'll do is we'll put a script, ps, and that should be just a small bit of it done. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to do is let's start building this and thinking about what we actually need. So what we really need is to hold some data. So let's go ahead and also build another thing on top of this in another file called use form.svelte.ts. This felt extension is important here because it lets us use those runes like the state, the derived state, and stuff like that. So these are actually important. Let's export a function called use form. Okay. So now what we can do is, what this can do is it can hold all of our state data and we can just call it in here and it will set all the states and we can use them in this component or in the children of the component. So quickly, if we want to render something in here, what we can do is let's first define an interface and think about what we want to pass in here as props. Really, what we need is maybe some initial data, let's say, and that can be any for now. You're actually, so that we have better typing, what we can do is we can actually have it be of type T. So we can say, if you want to use generics, if you're not familiar with them, maybe I can make a video on them, but they're a way of kind of inferring the types based on what types are passed in. So I'm just going to do a quick one where we do generics type T, and actually this will be a generic data then. And we probably want the schema, which is basically the Zod schema. So we can say Zod type and type T. You just need to import that. Perfect. And then we want, what else do we need? We need an onSubmit function. So we'll use that and call that internally in our library. So that can return, I guess, a void or a promise also so that it can be asynchronous. Cool. That's perfect. Do we need any more data? Then we need to define the children. In Svelte, they're called snippets, so you can call them anything. I'm gonna call it children, just for anyone that's coming from like a React and to type that we can say this, and what we want is, for now I'm just gonna say any, but we can type this a bit better later. So we've got our props defined. So next thing what we need to do is a way to tell Svelte that there's props. So we use that using the room. There we go. And then we can type that with this props here. And that's perfect. Then we have initial data. Let's get these. We can destructure these so that it's a bit cleaner. We have this. Perfect. And what we want to do now is we want to render. This render is basically the child that will be rendered, so that means that the form is actually controlling, let's say, the backend logic of the UI as opposed to the render logic. So the backend logic of the front end, so the JavaScript, TypeScript, the validation that we're about to create, isn't defining how the markup looks, which means it's really powerful. But then I can render children, and for now we'll just pass in an object for now. Oh, sorry, I need to type this. I typed this incorrectly. It needs to be in an array. My bad. Okay, perfect. So now that we've got that made, let's go ahead and hook it into our actual page first. So let's go and just, firstly, let's import that form component. So we have something called form. Import that. Perfect. And we can wrap it around this. And what we need to do is find those properties. So let's go and make we can actually infer the type of Zod. It has these helpers. So we can do, let's say, interface form values, let's call it. Form values equals Zod dot infer data. Sorry, I need to do a type. Let me see that infer. Then we can say type of schema. Yeah, perfect. And we have that. And now we need to create some initial values. So let's go initial data equals was type form values, and then we can say email first name last name roles as form values roles, just the type doesn't give out. So we'll set it to empty for now, and then we can say notifications isn't boolean is false default. We can set it to true, I guess, and then they can toggle it off. Looks better. Okay, cool. So you'll see for now we've got pretty much looks the exact same. Nothing's happened, but we haven't really hooked up anything yet. Okay, the next thing we need is that submit function. So let's create another function in here called function on submit. And all we'll do is we'll take in the values and we'll just simply console.log values. Uh, so now let's pass those properties in. So we've got initial data, which is equals to initial data. And in Svelte, you can just shorthand them like this, right? So you don't have to do like any of that stuff. And then we can do, what else do we need? Schema. Okay, perfect. Okay, it's giving out for type because we forgot to put values in here, and values will be of type T as well. Right, okay, it's cool. So we can type this as well, right? And get this. Okay, nice. Perfect. Now, no TypeScript given out. Now, if you quickly want to see the children here, get rid of this. Let's see that that gets rid of the, so that's rendering what's inside of that component. But we also have data in there as well, right? So like, if I just show you as an example, we can say A, and then inside of here, what I can do to render this is to snippet. So snippet, we can call A, or we can call, sorry, children, and that will have A inside of it. And what we can do is say a child, right? And inside of here, if we render A, we should see some cool stuff in here. For a second, you can see hey child, so that's how that works. So that's how we'll be passing data in there. Okay, let's remove that and clean this one up. So let's remove this stuff. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have our form rendering our children. We have it passing some data, but it's doing nothing really now. So we can just pass this back in, but it's not really doing anything right now, right? But let's go ahead and start building the actual state logic of this part. So let's go ahead and start building that. So let's pass in some properties. So in this properties, what we want is we want to, let's make a kind of another property or interface in here. So let's do an interface. And we'll say it will be pretty much similar to that properties one. So let's make an interface called I use form or something like that. And then what we can do inside of here is do the variables that we'll pass in. So we want to pass in that initial initial data, right? And that will be called, that will be of type T as well. And then what we want to do is also bring in, what else do we want? We want our schema, and that will be of type Zod type T, right? And then we also want to bring our onSubmit function, so we can call that inside of here as well. We can just say that that's passes in values of type T as well, and then it returns forms of void or of promise or promise void. Okay, cool. Okay, so we have that defined. So let's just make that and call it I use form. And then we can just simply import the stuff in here that we need. We need initial data, schema, and then we also need, what else we need? We need to bring or submit. Make this generic, pass this in. That should be pretty good then. Okay, nice, perfect. We have these. Cool. Okay, so we have a generic use form. So what do we actually need here? Let's think we need to have a value stored. So the form's actual value. So let's go ahead and make a state. So this is actually the svelte logic. We can pass in initial data and then all of a sudden that will become reactive. We can do the same for errors, which will be of an empty object. And actually what this state will be is of type T. This will be a record, sorry, a partial record. So basically an object with not all the fields but some, and it will have the key of type T inside of it. T, and then that will be a string. Okay. So basically the error will be an object and the object will be then a key inside. I think I missed one extra guy. One extra one of these, perfect. So that'll be basically a key of type T. So if we had something like this as an example, um, first name, let's say this is our form, Bob. This is the form. Errors can be of any of these keys. So any of the keys inside, let's say, for a better example, the error could be first name or last name, and then the value will be something like probably error, whatever comes from result config back there. So just so you know what those are. Okay, perfect. Let's continue on. Do we need any other data? We can say maybe for if someone's submitting the form and it's asynchronous, we can say they're submitting. So we can just have a simple little state there that's like a Boolean, right? Like Boolean, and then we can just say false. Okay, cool. All right, so we've got our basic little data set up here now, which is pretty good. And then we can start to return these. So we need to use these getters to return the data. So let's do values, get values, and then we can return values. Can also add one for errors, get errors. I can return this, return errors. Okay, nice, perfect. We can also do get submitting, and we can return submitting. Cool. Okay, so that'll return us the actual the value of those states. Next, what we want to do is we want to build a few kind of functions. So Zod has a kind of Zod just lets us call and basically validate, let's say, and it checks against our schema and our data, and it will give us back errors. The errors look different to the errors of just like an object with a key values. So what we want to do is we need to build a few helper functions on top of this. So let's build inside of here something called function validate. And what validate can do is it can call the Zod validate and then set the errors state so that we have a flat object of the key with the error message. So let's go ahead and build something like that. So if we go and what we'll need to do is we'll need to use that here. So let's create a little function outside of this because really we might use it somewhere else as well. So let's create that validate. And validate will be again type T and then it has schema. So we'll pass in that schema from above and then also the data. So let's do that type T and then also values, which will be another type T. Okay, perfect. And what it can do is it can return pretty much this guy, I guess. I want to return something exactly like this realistically. Or return, say the return of that is something like this, right? I think that's pretty good. I think, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's gonna give out for now, but that's okay. That's fine. Okay, so now let's use that. So what we want to do here is we say const result equals schema dot save parse, and we can do the values. So what that's going to do is basically just use that to check the schema against the values, and then if it fails, we'll get an errors response, or if it passes, we get a success response. So we can see underneath, and this will be type safe now, so that's pretty cool. So let's do if result dot success. So if it's done correctly and there's no errors, then let's just return an empty object. And if it does have errors, let's make a errors object. And let's do a for of loop over the result dot error dot issues, and this will give us each issue. So what we can do is do issue, and what we can say is issue const path equals issue dot path, and we can use errors at the path to set issues dot message. So what that's going to do is we're going to loop over the issues that come back from the dot validate function. Then we're going to, if they're successful, we return an empty object. If not, then we have errors and we loop through the dot errors and set the keys and the values of the error message back, and then we return errors. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and let's call this a validate function. So we can do errors equals zod validate. And what we want to pass in is the initial data, or sorry, the schema, and then also the values, so the actual updating data. And then if those errors have any, if the errors object has a length of, so errors errors object dot key, sorry, and then we do errors and we say dot length equals 0, and we can return that, and we can use that. Then if this comes back as true, then that means the form is valid. If not, then we set the errors and this is not true. So let's create another function underneath, function called submit, and what that will do is it'll call the unsubmit that we passed in. So let's do if validate. So if the form is valid, then let's do our work. If not, let's not. Before that, let's do what we can do is set our submitting to true. We can make this an async function because this could be a promise. This could be going to a backend and we might need to wait for half a second, or whatever. And we can say submitting equals false at the end. Okay. And what we can do now is we'll call on submit, on submit with our values because it's valid and it's true. And then that should be that. Okay, perfect. So I think we have like a base kind of done already. We have our form, which is getting set initial data. It's taking in the schema that we pass in. It's taking in the onSubmit function that we pass in. It's on when we call submit internally, what it's doing is it's calling the validate with the ZOD logic, checking it, parsing the errors in it. If there is errors, it won't submit. If there isn't errors, then it submits. Okay. So we can expose these functions now so that we can call them. So let's do submit and let's do, the validate will be internal only, the submit one we actually kind of care about. Okay. So now we go back to our form and what we can do is call that hook, let's say. So let's do const equals use form and we can set initial data that we have on submit. We have schema. Nice. Okay, did I do a typo there or something? Did I typo? My bad. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's good. And then what we have back is all this stuff, which is exactly what we want. Um, we can pass this in then. So like, let's type this a bit better so that the typing can be, so we have better TypeScript. So let's make another response here, something like interface. We'll call it I use form response or something like that, right? And we can actually, for correctness, let's call this iProps. Okay, let's go back to this. Let's go back here and do this, and what we have is values, which is of type T, right? Values, which is of type T. And then we have errors, so we can actually just take this code. Just copy this stuff. No, we did all the hard stuff already, so let's just copy this code over. Okay, perfect. We have submitting, which is a Boolean, isn't it? So Boolean, correct. And then we go down a bit further. Do we have any other things that we use? We have submit function, which basically doesn't really take anything. Submit, which is just a function that returns void or no, promise void. Okay, so we can define the response type. Let's call it I use form response and type T. Perfect. We have that now. Cool. Okay, that's good. Looks nice. Cool. We go back to our library in here. And now what we can define is let's export this interface so that we can use it in here. Export interface. And then what we can say is we're actually going to pass that I use form response and type T in here. Right. And then what we have in here is let's do something like forms. And then we can pass forms down into this child. Perfect. Cool. Okay, so that's pretty much a good chunk of it done already. So let's go ahead and start seeing it work a little bit. Let's go back to our page. And in here now, we should have some good type safety, which we do, which is pretty nice, right? We've got errors now. And you'll notice if we go in here, we've got errors dot email, first name, last name, notification. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. We can now use the library like this, to be honest. Like, actually, we're missing something that we would need. Maybe, yeah. we have no way of setting the state at the moment, right? We have values, we're exporting them, but we have no way of actually setting the field's values, which is kind of, when you think about it, the most important thing in a form. We're typing in and the input, we want it to be updated in here and reflect. So what we need is another function, right? Something like this function set the value or something, you can call it. You can call it whatever again. And then we'll call it field name. And that would be a key of key, right? And then also the value can be, I think we can just say any, or can we do, I think that's fine for now, honestly. So let's do values at field name equals value. Perfect. And let's export that function. And then we need to update our types too. Don't forget about that. So it's going to give out, but that's why TypeScript is really good. So like we did something wrong there and it gave out to us straight away. Let's add a value. And then that will be field name, which will be of type key of key. And then value is just any. And it returns a void. It doesn't do anything. Right, just simply sets a field. Perfect, cool. Okay. Now we can go back and we can start already like up doing this, right? So let's use values here and let's hook up to this field. So the first one, first name, John, let's do on input, on input. And what we can do is do e and say set value. So let's import that as a property. I should have that now. Set value. And we get type safety again, which is pretty nice, right? Across the board, we didn't do anything there. What it's doing is it's inferring your types based on the form values that are passed in here. So like you can imagine if you do this once, it's quite powerful. We can do something like first name and we can set him to e dot surrogate dot value. And just so that we know that it's updating, let's do a quick little JSON dot stringify values, right? Let's go back to our page because we haven't seen that in a while now. And this looks hideous, but let's go with it. So it's got our default values, it looks like, which is pretty good. It's not using it here because it's just static. And we've got our first name updating, right? Typing it, it's going in, which is nice. That's what we want. So cool, that looks like it's kind of working already. Now you could just use the form library like this, and to be honest, it's pretty good, and you don't have to worry about like things re-rendering, right, and stuff like that. If you look at a console log here, right, even though we're changing the data in here, forms run it once, and not running it anymore, so you don't have to worry about the form. And if I type really quickly, it's super snappy. So we don't have to worry about those things. This is already like a pretty decent way of building it. This has dissolve validation as well. So if we want to have an error here, let's go ahead and test that now. So what we can do is if, if error, or if, sorry, what do we have? Sorry, we need to import that or use that variable that we have, errors. If errors dot first name, then what we can do is close that if and just do something like p and do class next red 500 so it looks extra dangerous. Errors dot first name Cool. And then what we can do is when we submit this, it should now validate, which of course it didn't. And why is that? Oh, because we missed that to actually call it. So let's do on submit. And what we can do is do something like e dot or sorry, we pass in the event. We can do something like e dot prevent fall, and then do something like calling the actual submit function that we export now, right? Submit. Perfect. And what that's actually doing is that submit is calling the on submit that was passed in here. So we should see this, but I think we'll be blocked now for now because the schema will be getting it. So we should see an error now, which we do, which is cool, right? We've got our error. Obviously, we can add some classes here. If it has an error, we can say like if there's an error, to add additional coloring and stuff like that. I'm not going to do that for now. I'm going to continue on and we can go a bit further by making a use field. Um, but this is actually already like pretty workable. You could build from here. But yeah, let's go ahead and build the other component as well so that we can have a look at how we can use context. So to use a context, what we want to do is we can do set context and do, let's just say, really this hook should be called maybe a random ID, but let's just do forms for now. And we can set that to forms. And we need to import this, right? It's already imported. And then we can build something further down called field. So go ahead and build another thing called use field. So yes, okay. And then the field component will be a bit simpler. We'll just simply have where it renders the child and it passes down some of those values, let's say, that were in the form on the form here. So we'll use things like submit and stuff like that. So let's say I think the props for this would make sense to be the name of the input. So let's do interface I props and call it something like name. That would be a string. And then also, what else do we need in there? I guess a value would be helpful as well, maybe, which could be of type anything really. And let's do generics and do P. So that's how we can pass in a generic into the Svelte component. And then let's do the same stuff again. Let's do let then I props equals $sign props. And we can do something like import a name, import the value, and in our create a new use fields field. So what we want to do here is basically just get the context of the form, and then what we can do is with that just use some of the functions we already assigned basically here, which is pretty nice. So what we want to do is basically just use some simple states here. So we can do something really easy like, let's see, go back to our use field svelte. Actually, this mightn't even need any svelte stuff. Let's see. Let's write this. So let's do export function, use field, and then that will take in the form, let's say the form data. What we can do is pass in the form data, and then we can use that form data to render certain things back. So we can pass in the entire form. That will be of type. Where is that? I use form response. So I use form response. And this will be type any because we won't actually know the type of the form. We won't be actually passing in the form actually here. So we won't really know it, but we'll know that it is a form. Okay, and then we can say, let's call this interface I field props. I'll take in a form which is I use and it'll be type any. Don't know how to type that here in that case. We can also pass in the name of it as well. So that would be the name of the field and that would be a string. Right. Okay, perfect. Cool. That looks pretty good. Don't need to pass in the value really. Yeah, we don't need that. We're passing in the value here actually. We don't even need this. But why we're passing it in is that it's easier to type it and get that gives us good hints in our TypeScript when we're using it. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just create an object that we can return and we can basically build some functions on this. So get value will simply be return form dot values. So sorry. I field I field what I field if I could type would be nice. So what am I doing? Sorry, my bad. Name. Okay, perfect. And what we can do is basically that's just going to be an object and the field is just going to be the value that we're wanting is the name of the field and then just get that from the entire form object, right? Let's do the same with the error. Get error, do the same thing and just return form dot errors with name if it has any missing that semicolon there. Do we even need anything else? We can define the interface of this too, so that it's a little bit better. So let's do I field props. What do we call this one? I feel I use form response. I use field props. It's better just to keep them consistent. I use field response props, right? I use field. I use field. That's what I use field. I keep these consistent. That's probably one of the worst things ever is to not keep stuff consistent. So let's just keep them consistent. And then this will return I use field and what that will be is a value. A value, a value or any, and it can return an error, which is a string. And that's really fun. What's this coming out about? String or undefined, sorry. So let's do that. And return string or undefined. Then inside for component, let's consume these props and also then consume the actual context. So all we need to do is to get context, and that will be, or we say form, and then inside of here, type of this will be, type will be I use form response, but because we're not passing in the entire we don't want to pass in the entire initial data and all them fields just because it's a pain. We don't know the form data. No, hopefully there might be someone watch that knows how to do this, and if I figure it out, we can update the video. But I don't know how to do that as of right now. But this should still be pretty good. So we've got our forms context now. What we can do inside of there is we can just call that hook now const u const. Let's do that equals u is a field, and that will return what? We'll take in our form and the name, so we can take in our form here, the form, and then the name as well. And then that should be pretty good. Can say, can we type these a little bit better? Because we can pass in the field. We can say maybe for better typing, the value will be of type T, let's say. Pass in then T, and this can be T, and then actually this can then be T as well. So now we can infer the type based on what we're going to pass in, and we can just pass in. This will be inferred from the value, from the type of the value, right? That works pretty good. Yeah, nice. Okay, that looks pretty good. What else do we need to do? Oh, we should have done. Nice. Okay, so what we can do is just do another thing like that. Let's make another prop called children again. I'm gonna call it field actually now so that you can see that we can rename these. So I'm gonna do snippet, and then what that is it's actually brackets, and we can do what we can do. Um, what's that use field response? So we can say, let's call this X for a second. So that user field response is I I use field response of type T, so that will be exactly that. And then we can render field, and we can pass in, let's call this fields data, something like that works. Or to export this back here. Okay, perfect. Looks pretty nice now. Cool. Nothing field. Sorry. Field. Cool. I can go back to the original one, and we can switch this, or not even switch it, but we can just render this snippet. We can render snippets inside the snippets too, so that's super handy. We can render now. First of all, we need to import our form, our field. What it needs now is field, the field snippet, the name, which will be, let's say, first name, and then it will be the value, which will be initial date dot first name. This is only for TypeScript, so that we get a better typing. You actually don't need to pass this in, and it's not even used, so it's just, I don't know how there's a better way to type it, so let's go ahead and do snippet, we call that field this time, and then inside of here we've got value and error, Let's go ahead and dump this stuff back in here. Oh, okay, let's cut this out, paste this back in. Okay, and actually realize one thing we're missing from this hook is the actual setting the field, right? So what we want to do here is maybe do something simple like uh, do something like set value again. And that can just be a really easy function that does something like form dot values and then does name equals um, value because you don't even need that and we can just say that's pretty obviously and then value equals there value and it's going to cry about not having the type. So let's go ahead and here and do that's a function which will pass in that t value and return void again, not do anything. Now let's go back to our page and use those. So instead of no set value, having taken an extra parameter, we can just do set value. And what we can do is just this. And this should work the same now. So let's go ahead and test this. And if we cross our fingers, cross our toes, we should have now that form and the field kind of all together and in a nice way. And we get an internal server error, which is of course a good sign. It says cannot read properties of values. So where is that? Form values. Where we go. Form values. It's console log something. Form because we did in the field, we don't have the values. Uh, let's debug this for a second. We find undefined. And why is that? Center context. And we're rendering it inside. Okay, let's see why that's happening. Typo, of course. Okay, now that we have that working, let's see. To okay, nothing's updating. That's pretty cool, right? Next thing's next. What we need to do in here is let's see. We need to go back here. And because we didn't set this, we can actually do this as well, right? We can do name and then value. We're actually using the form directly. And I can update this and hopefully this works, John. And if we try to submit it, Okay, nice. Okay, that's a long video. If you've made it to the end of this, well done. For you, what I want you to do, if you can continue on with what we've made, is you continue on with the next input and try and get it to where I have it in this demo, for example, this one. If you can build out the rest of this, and be interested if you can put like a link to it or anything like that and see how you did it, how you, if you add any more, if you want to use it in a different way, how you went about doing it, maybe had better typing, stuff like that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it's helpful. Um, yeah, I might make more of these in the future, but I hope this is a good video for you. Yeah, peace, take care.